So, Alan Watts. For a whole generation of people searching for meaning, he was this brilliant guide who made ancient wisdom feel totally fresh and new. But for his critics, he was a fraud who didn't live by his own rules. So which one is it? That's what we're going to dig into today.
The best place to start is probably with what the man said about himself. He called himself a joker, like a wild card in a deck of cards. And look, that wasn't just him being clever. It was basically his way of telling us, hey, don't even try to pin me down. I'm not going to fit into your neat little boxes.
And that right there, that self-description gets to the heart of the big question people have been asking for decades. Who was this guy really? Was he this deep spiritual guru, a top-tier philosopher, or was it all an act? Was he just a really convincing fraud? Okay, so to really wrap our heads around him, we've got to look at the two, completely opposite stories that are told about him. These are the two big narratives that shaped how everyone saw him pretty much from the moment he burst onto the scene. And boom, you can see that split perfectly right here. On one hand, you've got the idol, right? The psychedelic guru, the voice of the counterculture. But then you flip it, and on the other side, you have the iconoclast, the guy dismissed as, intellectually shallow, a hypocrite, someone who just watered down these ancient traditions. So for his supporters, he was an absolute genius. I mean, think about it. He took these really dense, kind of out there Eastern ideas and made them understandable. Not just understandable, but exciting. He was a huge part of that whole San Francisco Renaissance, hanging out with guys like Kerouac and Ginsberg, and he was a star speaker, inspiring a whole generation to look at the world differently. But his critics, they saw a completely different picture. They looked at his personal life, and let's be real, his love for women and booze was pretty well known, and they saw a massive contradiction. They were like, how can you preach this stuff and live like that? Academics basically said he was dumbing it all down, and some hardcore Zen folks even claimed he'd never had a true moment of enlightenment, that Satori experience. So here we are, stuck with these two polar opposite views. Was he a genius or just a popularizer? A sage or a sellout? But, and this is the important part, what if that's just the wrong question to be asking? What if the whole mistake is trying to cram him into one box or the other?
To get to the real Alan Watts, maybe we need to ignore the public hype and the criticism for a second. Let's just look at all the different hats he wore during his life. And trust me, some of them are pretty surprising. I mean, look at this. The guy wasn't just one thing. He was a theologian, a mystic, a Zenist, a philosopher, a psychologist. Heck, you could even call him a cultural symptom. He was all of these things, a lot of the time, all at once. In a world where everyone was becoming a specialist, he just completely blew that idea up. And his career path? It's just wild. He starts out as an ordained Episcopal priest. I mean, deep inside the establishment of Western religion. Then, nope, he's done with that. He jumps over to academia, becomes a professor, even a dean. And then he walks away from that too, to basically invent his own job title, freelance philosopher.
And going independent like that, it was absolutely crucial, because it let him focus on what really became his life's work, and that was being a kind of translator, a bridge between two totally different worlds. See, he looked around and saw this huge gap. The West, right, we had all this advanced psychology, but it felt, a little empty spiritually. And the East had this incredible, ancient spiritual wisdom, but for most Westerners, it felt totally out of reach. So Watts kind of went, okay, my job is to build a bridge and connect these two. There's a great term for this. The psychologist Benjamin Woolman called him an apostle of rapprochement. It sounds kind of fancy, but all it means is someone who's dedicated to bringing two opposing sides together to find harmony. In this case, it was Eastern mysticism and Western psychology. He wanted to show how they didn't just coexist, but could actually make each other better. And he didn't just talk about it, he actually did the work. He built that bridge, piece by piece. First, he wrote this foundational book, Psychotherapy East and West, that literally connected the dots. Then, through all his talks and books, he brought ideas from Taoism, Buddhism, and Hinduism to a massive Western audience. And this wasn't just for, hippies in a field. He was seriously influencing the people who were shaping modern therapy. Okay, so after all of that, where do we land? What are we supposed to make of him? What's the real legacy of this incredibly complicated, brilliant, and, yeah, very flawed person? Well, his biographer, Monica Furlong, probably said it best. She basically said you just can't deliver an easy verdict on the guy. He escapes all the labels. If you try to pin him down, you're always going to miss something.
Look, he was not some perfect sage on a mountain, but he wasn't a simple charlatan either. And if you try to make him one or the other, you're missing the entire point of everything he taught and everything he was.
His real value, maybe even his genius, is in the complexity. He didn't run from his contradictions, he leaned into them. He even had a term for it, a coincidence of opposites. He was this walking, talking paradox where the sacred and the profane, the serious and the silly could all exist at once. He showed us what it looked like to just be a messy, whole human being.
And maybe that's the real takeaway here. The most important question isn't who was Alan Watts. The question he really leaves us with is, what about us? How do we deal with our own contradictions? How do you and I bridge the gap between our spiritual ideals and our messy, everyday lives? Now that's a question worth thinking about.